Super. Thanks very much, Shane. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. I see we've got people from throughout the province. Some of you were involved last week with the process, and I hope you found it beneficial. Obviously, getting a few more people on board, it's a bit of a momentum gathering exercise, but yeah, welcome to the second session of our online training. We're talking about social media in schools. Going to be about an hour. There's going to be some time at the end for questions. Also a spot on the navigation panel to ask questions. Shane, once again, thank you very much for your involvement in the background. You'll obviously be feeding questions through as we go through the process and as we have a look at what social media is about and where we're going with it. I will refrain in this discussion from mentioning any schools. I'll try and refrain from mentioning any schools, but social media is happening right where we are. It's not a case of happening somewhere else. It's happening overseas, or it's happening in another part of the world. It's happening around us all the time, and it varies in various formats. We're obviously trying to provide the best advice for schools. It's a bit of a growing field. I was fortunate to sit down with our legal officer, Rane van der Merwe, and work through some details, and hence that navigating through defamation of social media in schools. The document that Shane mentioned is available. Not going through it in detail today when I discuss this, but it's a reference document for the back of what we're discussing here. So it really gives a bit of insight as to where we're going, to try and get a handle on what we're talking about, social media. I see Gavin Lamboy is on board. Welcome, Gavin. Good to see you involved as well. If there are any questions, once again, please feel free to ask. It's a platform of about an hour long that we're going to go through, just to have a look at some of the details that we're dealing with. Next week, just as a bit of an aside, next week we're going to be looking at HR processes. For those of you that are interested, that have got vacant posts, I've been given a commitment from the department that by the end of August, the management vacancy post is going to be released. All sorts of reasons and excuses why it hasn't happened, unfortunately, but they do tell me it's going to be an open post. There's rumors going around that it would be a closed vacancy post, but I have had confirmation, a fairly high-level discussion, so I don't think they're going to go back on that it's going to be an open management post. In line with that, we're going to be looking at HR issues next week. But if we have a look at this week, really what we're looking at is social media and how do you handle it. It's got a defining line, and it's very difficult to put something together on social media that gives you a flow chart. It would be lovely if we could just flow chart social media problems in a school and say, here's a template, just follow through the process and go into the process. If you hit yes here, you go down a certain line. If you hit no here, you go down another line and you find the solutions as you go along. Unfortunately, social media is not like that. It's very complex, it's very draining, and it's very scary. And I think that's the one reason why we are quite worried about it and where it can go and the damage that it can cause. Essentially, we're looking at it and saying, is it defamation or is it bad reflection? Does it just reflect badly on the school, whatever's been said in social media? And I'll try not to mention any mediums because I don't want to sort of box the conversation into just Instagram or just Facebook. It's just everything out there that happens on a digital basis ends up being social media. Whether it's a WhatsApp group, we could talk about examples about how WhatsApp groups go wrong, whether it's Facebook, whether it's, matter of fact, even D6 Communicator can be considered social media. But all of those aspects we need to consider and see how we're going to handle them legally. Where are our processes and what can we look to put in place? So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a look at defamation and try and get a bit of a definition on defamation so we can understand what it's about, and then discuss what the difference is that and between what I term bad reflection. It's just things that are said about the school on social media that aren't quite a lie, but they aren't quite the truth either. They just make the school look in a bad and reflected badly on the school. And what do you do about those and how do you handle those? We'll look at the nature of defamation. We'll also look at how a school should react and what steps you can possibly follow. We'll speak about reaction and the steps to follow with regards to the learners and obviously the educators as well. I think we've got to consider that they're not free from this process. And also the difference between how you're going to handle the educators that are employed by the department and the educators that are employed by the governing body and what are the different steps there. Then briefly, we'll look at a social media policy and a plan. Once again, as I always say, please refer to details on the FEDSAS website. There's a lot of information there. If you cannot find any information there, please get hold of me and say, we're looking for something. Is there something that's going to help us in this process? That's also how we develop our documents. When schools come to us and say, how do we go about processes, then we have a look at it. There is a social media policy on the website, so I'm not going to go down step by step about how to put that together. it is going to be a long consultative process in the real form. Once you start looking at a media policy in your school, and we urge schools to look at it, it is quite a lengthy process that needs to be driven through in the school processes to get it in place to try and manage it. Okay, if we have a look at what defamation is, I didn't invent this. Obviously, you can see I've snapshotted this or screenshotted it from probably Google or somewhere like that. But it's essentially the action of damaging a good reputation of someone. For defamation to take place, you actually need to identify someone. So if we consider it the unlawful behavior, let me just move a few things around here. The unlawful or intentional publication of defamatory words and behavior that refers to a plaintiff. Anything damaging to a reputation, and usually a court will ask, and when they've got to decide on what defamation is, they'll say, what's a reasonably thinking man or woman who sees or hears these comments, will they think any less of you for seeing or hearing these posts or hearing this comment? That's very much where we have a look. The defense will obviously lie in the truth to the question above. Okay, so would a reasonably thinking man or woman actually see you less in light of this, or see you better, or not have a changed opinion from that side? And then what you need to do, you need to prove certain facts if you're going to look at defamation. You need to firstly obviously determine that it was defamatory. Was it saying bad about the school, if we use the school example, or the individuals in the school? And was the post referring to you or the school in specifically? And then most importantly, we need to be able to identify the person who's actually put the statement out there. Social media is really difficult to identify who's saying the bad things. There are ways, and fairly costly ways and time-consuming ways, of getting the various social media platforms to provide you that information. But if you can identify who the person is from the post that posted, then it's so much easier to actually look at defamation and actually identify it. So maybe in a bit of a summary, you need to determine if it's defamatory. Were the post actually referred to you? And then most importantly, can you identify someone? So can you actually go to someone and say, we can identify these posts, and then we have a look at it. So you need to go through those processes, and you need to be able to look at that setup. I won't go so much into steps just right now, but you kind of need to be able to also keep this as proof. Someone the other day very cleverly said to me that the beauty, if we want to call it, about social media is that you can record what was said. So you can take hearsay out of the process. But please make sure when you do have defamatory or just negative reflections of the school on social media, make sure you take a recording of that, because these things can be deleted to the public, so they won't be in the public eye, and then it is very difficult to get hold of them again after that. It is possible, but it's not easy to get hold of them. So if you do see something about your school, the first thing is to actually save it, whether it's a screenshot or if you could publish it somehow, but actually save it so that you've got that information down the road. Really not a problem if you end up with an archive of stuff that's been said. You might not have to react on them, but I'll go through two case studies that we've looked at recently, and that will give you a bit of an idea of how to start handling these processes and what we need to do and what we need to learn from those processes. So if we move on and look at the first case, and I purposely haven't mentioned what school it is, and I'll put in big letters that says it's in another province, so please don't try to think about where the school is. But essentially, pictures were posted on a Facebook page that was mentioning how school was handling children in a bad manner, bullying children, not giving them due respect. In itself, it wasn't a problem, but that Facebook page had 12,000 followers. So, and when I say followers, I term them loosely: comments, shares, likes. There's some sort of an association with that Facebook page. So as a result, there was contribution to distribution. So there was liability. There were 12,000 people that were actually looking at these comments. So that's the one case that we look at, and we say, well, how are we going to handle these cases, and what do we do in these cases, and how do we go about looking and solving the situation where that is, let's call it defamation in this case, that we've determined that it's defamatory to the school, and we need to actually stop the process. So first thing we suggest you do is a letter to the parents. Obviously ask the parents to come in and speak to the parent, but clearly explain the defamation that exists in the posting. So make sure you've got recordings of the postings, and you can sit down and say, this clearly says this and this about the school, and it's in contradiction to what the school stands for. It reflects negatively on the school. and we need some desired outcomes here. We need some outcomes that you will delete these entries from the school because they are defamatory, and we need a written assurance that this won't be repeated. Along within that letter and communication to the parent, please don't hesitate to say that you will, because you can take legal action, and that can go as far as interdicting them, a civil claim, and further punishment as ruled by court. That would take place from there. So in this case, maybe a bit of a background. The parents has posted some stuff about the school. They're a bit unhappy about how things have happened, and they get into an overwind. They go on a social media spin, and that's really the steps that the school needs to consider. That's how they're going to take through the process. Bear in mind, this example is more on defamation. It's not a case of just, oh, it looks bad and it reflects badly on the school, but this is where they started selling some serious accusations about the school that affect the school's positive image. The communication must be clear to the parents involved, or the parents involved, and the remedy required as well. So those outcomes quite clear. Put it down in writing. This is what we expect from this discussion. Once we start moving down to further processes, and we start looking at things like interdicts, we start looking at costs involved that are already start climbing. And an interdict on a social media case recently, I think, ended up at about 20,000 Rand. But if we maybe a bit light on the figure, between 10 and 25,000 Rand, depending on the complexity of the case, that's where your attorneys would then get involved, and they would then get an interdict served on this person to remove the information. In light with that, and in light with last week's discussion about budgets, schools need to start considering budgeting for these processes. Sad as that sounds, there's lots of other things we need to do, but in the best interest of the learner and the best interest of your school, you unfortunately need to start making some provision for legal action that you might have to take. The interdicts are generally not difficult to get hold of once it can be proven that there is damage to character that needs to be corrected here. Civil claims are a bit harder in a school environment. Civil claims are more in line with what it's going to cost. So if you've incurred a cost, if we move it to a business environment, and say, for some example, post that's been put on Facebook says OBC removals are a really bad removal company and everything gets broken. In the meantime, they've only had one incident like that. They could then lose business from it, and they could account for that loss of business, and they could then put in a civil claim against the defendant with regards to that. In the school environment, it's very difficult because it's more brand damage that takes place. It's erosion of value in the school, and it's very difficult to put a figure onto that. So it's very difficult to start pushing a civil claim and further punishment with regards to a school. Loss of goodwill by defamation cannot be calculated immediately, and it's going to be difficult to agree with anybody in the situation that is what it's going to cost the school. So really, we're looking down as far as interdict to actually get those posts removed. To try and get a civil claim within a school environment is not impossible, but it's going to be quite difficult to actually run through and put in place. Okay, the second one is a case of where there's a bad reflection of the school. Okay, and I hope we don't have any schools' names in any of those pictures there, but it's where there are posts reflecting your senior prefects or your head prefects involved in certain things that are not considered good taste for the school. It's not really slander or defamation. It's not always related directly to a school activity, but it does reflect on the school. And it is important that you do take notice of these things and actually do something about them, because otherwise they just start rumoring around, and then your image of your school starts getting destroyed and eroded. Often they're not unnoticed unless there's further attention drawn to these cases. So a case like this, where a schoolboy might have a lipstick stick on his collar, and it might be a minor detail. I don't want to get overboard graphic about the things. I think us in education all know that there are a lot worse cases than a simple explanation like this. But that things like that sort of reflect badly on the school. You know, a passing comment that a parent might put on a Facebook post, or a message that's sent out to a group of parents to say, no, this and this is happening at the school and shouldn't be happening, or on my day it didn't happen, whatever. So then it starts putting the school in a bad situation. At this point also, once again, we suggest that you look at it and try and define it and see where it's set. It might not directly relate to the school activity, but I think you've got to consider it because it does reflect on the school. What we're suggesting in this case is that the governing body chairman or whoever's involved in your communication from a governing body side prepare a statement and a press release Just to remind all the principals that are on board, you aren't allowed to communicate to the press with regards to your requirements or conditions of employment with the education department. So once again, please make sure that you don't communicate to the press, but that the chairperson communicates to the press. Obviously, in a case where you've got a picture like the one on the top left, you're not going to go to press and put a picture out there, but have a plan, have an idea of how you're going to handle things, regardless of where they are. Obviously, have a look and see that you take notice of the incident and that this school does not align themselves with such behavior, that you are taking corrective action, and that this behavior is not in line with what our values are of the school. And often putting out a communication like that kind of just makes things settle down until we move on, until people move on to, unfortunately, the next social media outburst, and then they might gather momentum on that. So this action, or this course of action we're suggesting, is put a communication out there so that there is one communication to refer back to. So you don't have multiple communication. You've then got a communication chain that you can always put out to anybody who asks about the incident. And then you need to just sit back and let it settle. Hopefully it will settle then, and it won't become a major incident. The more attention is drawn to these incidents, the bigger they get. So the more you try and counter them on your own school's Facebook page or your own communication devices or channels, whatever, the more it actually says, well, was there something in it? Is there something in it? So don't raise too much attention to it. But I think it's very important that I reiterate that the governing body needs to handle this communication and send it out from there. Multiple events of this nature can, over time, damage the name of a school. So it's important that this is monitored and that there is feedback and there is some sort of action taken there. Obviously, if you can narrow it down to one specific person, it's worthwhile engaging with that person, having a cup of coffee and saying, hang on a sec, that's just offsides. We haven't heard all that information. We haven't been privy to that information. Give us a chance to actually have a look and have a discussion with you and see where it goes from there. And I'm not saying, when I say let the dust settle, I'm not saying don't do anything about it, but monitor the situation, make sure you've got communication, make sure you reported that it's been assessed. You never know when these things flare up again, and then you can say, look, last time we did look at it, this is what we considered, this was our action, and then you're justifiable in your actions or your inaction, if you want to consider it an inaction, to take it through. So if we just look in more general terms, those are two very rough scenarios that I put together that give you a bit of an idea of what we need to consider about. But some things we need to remember about, and I know we've all been attending social media awareness campaigns and processes, but remember that a rule of thumb is anything on social media is on the notice board, okay? If we have a look at that big billboard out there, anything on Facebook or Twitter gets a like, and it suddenly becomes the notice period, notice of the community. So you need to be aware of how effective that is and how it works. The second thing we need to consider is that with freedom of speech, and we all adhere to it, and we all understand that it's enshrined in our Constitution, but you need to also understand that this right is not absolute and it's not without responsibility. So what you say in speech in social media is not just set out there and you can just throw it away as a comment and leave it. There's more than enough examples, and I'm not going to spend time coloring the picture with examples that are out there, but we all know there are a lot of examples, from premiers of the Western Cape to all sorts of people who live in the South Coast who've said things on social media who consider it to be private, and it's not. The bottom line is that whatever you say, social media will determine how they're going to link it to a certain group or to an organization. You don't decide how you're going to link your comments to an organization. Social media decides it nowadays. So you cannot say, in my private capacity, I say this and this and this. If you're sitting on a governing body and you mention something, people in the community say, well, think, or can link it to the governing body. That's their choice. They start doing that. So you need to be very aware of your communication that goes out. If we have a look at some of the things that considers defamation against educators, it's not just against the school, but it's against persons that we need to consider. And when you start getting these incidents that are direct attacks on people and there's defamation, then we start looking at things like protection orders and start engaging with the parents or disengaging with the parents and say, look, your access to the school ground is denied because you are actually not contributing positively to the school. And as a principal, you're entitled to do that. I'm talking to the principals when I say that. Remember, people are on the school ground by your invitation. Okay. Someone steps out of line and is obnoxious and negative and not contributing positively, you've got a right to actually say to them, you're not the sort of person that we want on our school ground. So that's a consideration that you can look at. I think, yeah, I have gone through it, but just to reiterate, social media users determine who you are associated with. Okay, so you need to be aware of that. If we then start having a look at some details of how to handle social media and how the school manages the risks, court cases around it, and it might be worthwhile if any of you are interested to have a look at that court case and get some idea about it. But at the end of the day, the judge ruled on the process to say that those who make postings about others on social media are well advised to remove such posts. Carries on a little bit more to say it's seldom worth contesting that situation. The background to this court case is that two gentlemen who used to be business partners obviously had a disagreement, and some serious insinuations were made on Facebook about the other's ability to bring up his daughters because he was either inebriated or he was on drugs or he was involved too much at the church and he wasn't at home. So I don't want to go into all the juicy stories that we kind of start thinking about, but essentially these two business partners had a serious fallout. At the end of the day, the one was asked to remove the information. So Harold asked Wills to remove the information from Facebook. He didn't want to remove it, and the costs were then sent down, and the process was then ordered by court that Mr. Wills would remove all postings, and he was ordered to pay Mr. Harold's legal costs. Now, those of you that are briefly involved in court cases, you know when a legal cost is ordered to pay, it's quite clearly that there is a victor in the process, and one person has been determined by the court to be rightly and correctly impeded upon, and as a result has been given a ruling in their favor. It's not a 50-50 judgment call where they say costs are each carried by their own. So in this case, Mr. Wills was ordered to make payments for Mr. Harold's legal costs and was ordered to remove them. So that's been the defining legislation that's taken place with regards to communication, and we need to make sure that essentially the message is that you need to be very cautious as to what you write about other people on any social media platform. Obviously, this was just looking at Facebook, but the court ruling was a lot wider than that. And that's the defining court ruling that we look at and that we would advise from in that side. Okay, so if we want to just, after looking at a bit of the legislation, go back and see what the focus is with regards to schools, and essentially we look at three areas, the learners, the employees. We'll look at a bit of a definition between those in service of the governing body and those in service of the department. So as you well know, there are kind of slightly different rules and processes to follow in that process, and then look at the parents' involvement with regards to the code of conduct. I'll discuss it now, and I've got there as previously discussed. We've discussed it on different forums, but the control of parents, if we can call it that, is quite a difficult thing in a school environment. But more and more we're saying parents need to adhere to a certain code of conduct as well, and at least need to acknowledge that there's a code of conduct that the parents are aware of and they have cited. And in that code of conduct, we look more specifically into social media and explain to them what social media damages are. A lot of them, obviously, they weren't around when social media took place, and they aren't aware of the impacts that social media are having, not just on their children's psyche at home, but also on the educational processes. And I think it's very important that school governing bodies set up meetings with parents, and when they can meet with parents or find other forms of communication, to let them know that there is a code of conduct, and we expect parents in the school to behave in a certain manner. Obviously, the matter at hand is with regards to social media, that they need to specifically consider that. We'll look at a few slides that will take us through some of the steps so we can see how to handle the process. Like always, this all falls under a law, and the Schools Act, Article 8, gives us code of conduct consultation processes that need to be adopted. These code of conducts need to be consulted, especially with social media, because it is a very new, undefined topic that needs to be considered. And then also you need to make sure that there's an obligation that the learners got an obligation to comply with this code of conduct. And then obviously discipline steps can be taken should the code of conduct not be adhered to, and that will then fall under your school's general code of conduct, which is one of your governing body policies. just a bit of a, sorry, jump back to see what we're going to define as defamation. It's generally anything that is bad comments, rumors, defamatory, misleading or fake photographs, false websites, social media network profiles, emails, and we all know the dangers of texts and emails that go out, and any publication that is in violation of the school's good name. So, like any other processes, your social media needs to have a code of conduct, and obviously tied to that, you'll have your disciplinary process. And it's very similar to any of the other disciplinary processes. Because it's a new subject doesn't mean there's a new process to it. The discipline committee needs to be appointed, and that SGB needs to delegate the powers to that discipline committee to handle it. Once again, like anything that we handled in schools, and we know a lot of them are in that situation, it's if your procedures are not correct, then that's when your whole process falls apart. So although there might still be guilt proven or innocent proven at the end of the day, if there is a finding and it leads to an imposition of an appropriate sanction, the deterrent is often on the procedures. So we need to have a look and see how the procedures take place. Obviously, we need an investigation into the incidents, and in this case, we need proof. And with social media, once again, you can get proof. Then we look at notice periods, time frames of notice periods of disciplinary hearing. So that's very much like we would be handling any other discipline process that we handle in our school environments to date, and in the normal ways that we handle those processes. It's a standard process. It's anything different to what we're used to and what we've come to understand, and what we all hopefully guide ourselves through in the process. The disciplinary hearing's got two parts, just to recap. The initial finding, and then you end up with a guilty or an innocent finding, and then obviously from that you get an imposition of an appropriate sanction, and then at that point you can bring in other evidence and see what other mitigating or aggravating circumstances might be in place. Bear in mind that sanctioning is always in line with restorative justice, so it's to create a learning environment from the process. More and more people are saying you take away a children's cell phone and it's actually not teaching them how to use it properly. And I think that's the sort of consideration that we've got to consider. Okay, part one, just to go through it again, and it's very much like this for an educator as well. Educator on the governing body's payroll, if I can call it that, will be handled through in a very similar process. First step is the charges put forward, guilty, not guilty, or guilty, and then leading of witnesses, testimony, and cross-examination to test where you are. Once you've had full examination, the school concludes its case with those wonderful words, I conclude my case, I rest my case. We're going to have a look and see what we're going to then do as far as the sanctioning goes from there. Very important, once again, like any disciplinary processes, that we run a first and a second part process, because it clearly defines how we're handling the process. Then you'd look at the second part, part two continued, look if there's any further information. You'd look at the order of presentation, the learner, a reply by the school, and then you'd end up with a judgment. So you'd go through the process so that you fully investigate that whole process and handle that process as needed to be handled from there. Once you've got all that information, you've got enough information to then make a call. That disciplinary committee will decide, is the person guilty of what has been laid on the charge, or is the person innocent? Then start looking at the imposition of punishments. First step, evidence and aggravation. Second step, evidence and mitigation. So what's on the evidence that tells us this person has repeated this, or it's going to be repeated, and where's our concern? And what's the second step if the person is understanding that they need to be learning this process, and where do we go? And you can go through an interview process, and then you end up with a sanctioning process from there. While we're talking about sanctioning, I think it's very important to understand that social media at this stage is quite, as I've mentioned, it's quite a new and volatile subject, and you kind of are almost, sanctioning takes place by society. Okay, so we need to be very careful that when a social media outburst happens, it's first contained, it's first managed, it's first guided. Once it's calmed down, then you could have a look on the imposition. And unfortunately, and we've seen a number of cases, not just in public schools, but in private schools as well, is where outside agents get involved and come into the school and say, we're going to sort this out. The due processes of the school need to be followed, no matter how volatile the position is. We need to actually give both parties, or all parties involved, fair time to go through the process of assessing what actually transpired and where the process was in place, so we can actually have a look at it from there. Okay, alternative measures, discipline measures, and we're still grappling with what we're doing, but obviously this will include a discussion with the parents, reflective activities such as learning where things have gone wrong, and we're all learning this process, counseling the damages of social media and making an awareness of that. There might well be anger management required depending on the volatility of the posting or the transgressions, and further interventions that we need to consider there. Sorry, I jumped through that quite quickly. It's unlikely, I have to say, it's unlikely at this stage that a social media post, unless it is in the highlights, and I have to say it, of racial aggravation or something like that that's gone viral, as we've seen at a few schools, it's unlikely that you're going to get an expulsion in that process. It is a learning process that we need to look at from that side. There may well be cases where it becomes a civil case, but that would be outside the ambit of the school, and you might have a case where you get a more civil case sitting on your hand that you've got to then consider, and then that would be handled from the parent side, that they would look at it from that aspect. While we're talking about civil cases, just very interesting to note that I recently read that WhatsApp has got an age limit. I think it's got the youngest age limit. I stand to be corrected, but I think it's 14 or 15. Most social media, it's a legal communication form. It's got an age limit on it. If you are younger than the given age and you're using social media, your parent is responsible. So that's something to just consider, and that's essentially why that learner-parent interaction is quite important. I know also we consider social media to be, from a learner's viewpoint and the risks in the learners, to be a high school phenomena, but unfortunately it's becoming more and more a primary school issue as well that needs to have a look at from there. Obviously, from your educator and your parents' viewpoint, it happens in both environments. You can't be specific on where you're going to have more social media concerns, but it really comes down to creating effective communication platforms to try and reduce it from there. Okay, if we look at employer and employees relationships with regards to how we're going to handle it, and I'm talking apart from civil or criminal proceedings. Okay, every now and again I'll get a phone call from someone to say they have been sued. A parent has sued a teacher. They now want a restraining order against the child, and I kid you not, there's some of these ridiculous things that happen out there. Now the parent wants the teacher to educate their child, but they can't come in contact with the parents. It just really doesn't work well from that side. But so apart from civil and criminal proceedings, the biggest deterrent is disciplinary action that we need to have a look at. And we need to distinguish between the employer, whether it's SGB or whether it's the state, because there's a different process involved depending on where that person is employed and where the disciplinary action can take place. The disciplinary action against an employee employed by the governing body is done in accordance with the school's code of conduct. And obviously the educator, if it is an educator, it's also backed up by SACE. South African, I've got a blank at the moment, but the South African Institute of Educators, they would then handle that process and give you guidelines on that process. But with regards to an employee from the governing body needs to handle it through their code of conduct and through their discipline procedures. And those are as per any other disciplinary procedures that you have in place, okay? Once again, the FEDSAS website has got a whole list of those. Obviously, you need to make sure that they are geared to handle social media as well, that you understand there is a place for it in that code of conduct and how that's handled from there. The disciplinary hearing is, as I've described it above, very similar to what you're going through with a learner, but it differs from no other disciplinary procedures, and it handles the process in line with that as well. On the part of the department, there's always a challenge, and I say often we get a challenge with the department to support the process, but on part of the department we need to obviously engage with the department, but the Employment of Educators Act guides us through what is considered misconduct, and that needs to be then handled from that aspect there. I'm not going to read through all the details there, but basically it's referred to, and there is a code of conduct under the Employment of Educators Act that takes them through that process to handle your educators as well. It goes further, and the highlights there are commits an act of dishonesty or discriminates against another person. It doesn't define at this stage social media per se. Obviously, it was set up before social media was considered a concern, but it falls into those categories that can be considered and need to be handled in that aspect. With regards to the employment of educators, the sanctioning that then takes place is obviously there's counselling, there's verbal warning, there'll be written warning, the final written warning, and there might even be dismissal if it goes through to a major transgression and it continues happening from that side. It's important to know that the principal, as a representative of the education department, handles these disciplinary steps. Okay, so it's not the governing body that handles these steps. The principal needs to handle those steps. So just to define the difference, your governing body employee educator components are managed through your code of conduct, and your governing body handle that process through a disciplinary committee. With regards to the educators, that's handled through the education department, slightly different direction, and runs through the education department where they must handle the disciplinary steps so that they can be put in place in the correct format. Obviously, in the case of serious misconduct, we'll get to further levels of sanctioning. Notices need to take place, the correct notice period. The hearing must take place within 10 days of the notice being given. The educator has a right to be represented by trade union or fellow employees. And then you've got to determine the debt or the indebtedness of the process. But the normal course of a trial would then take place. At the end of the day, you look at sanctioning, which needs to provide evidence before a verdict on the sanctioning is served. And that's the process that would take place under the employment of educators side. Obviously, the union involvement is a lot stronger there, and it needs to be considered. Without going into the details, sorry, skip that one. Without going into further details with regards to the non-educators, and I'm talking about non-educators on the service of the department, that's where you need to look at as well. Those are the disciplinary steps that need to take place and need to run through that process and need to be handled under that line there. And that's fairly laid out and straightforward to run through from there. Okay, so having gone through those details and given you a bit of a snap overview of what to do, we look at social media policy. As I said, I'm not going to go through the details. There is one sitting on our FEDSAS website that will give you guidelines as to where to go. And as I said before, it is a consultative process. Your governing body needs to agree on it. It can be quite a lengthy process. Recently, on a personal note, we found a good way of doing it is actually putting the policy up on a big screen and actually working through it word by word so the governing body understand what it's about. Obviously, it takes a lot of time, and you might break it into a committee that actually looks at it and then would report back to your governing body. From there, it needs to then go on to your management and through to your teachers and then through to your learners via your RCLs. And then very, very importantly, through to your parents. So it's important that your social media policy, your parents are aware of your social media policy so you can get their buy-in and their understanding of it from there. The document that we spoke about in the beginning of the handout has got further details with regards to navigating your way through the social media concern. And then have a bit of a plan in place. Now, when I say a bit of a plan, I've got to say a bit because we don't know what the next social media concern or is going to be. We kind of still think, and I say we, older folks amongst us, maybe start thinking about Facebook as being the only social media platform, but there are things out there that I don't even know about, and I'm quite aware of a lot of things, but they're various things, I mean, and they happen all the time, so we need to be aware of what's going on. Get a bunch of social media rangers together, and that sounds very strange and very Americanized, but get some parents together who are on social media or who are aware of social media. Their task is simply to report back to a designated person at the school as to what's happening on social media. Not long, lengthy reports, but just this is what we're seeing, this is what we're hearing. There's good stuff coming through. The other day I mentioned to a group of people in the governing body, I said, go onto your school's name and search images on Google. Just search images and see what comes up. It'll give you an indication of what is being spoken about in your school environment, and it gives you a very quick graphical and the right way of saying things, image of what your school is about from that side. So type in your school's name and just go images and see what pops up from there. But get a bunch of parents who are active on social media to act as your lookouts, as your rangers, to alert you to information. They're not tasked and they're not mandated with communicating to anybody on that platform, just to communicate to the person in the school who's looking at social media to say, this is what's being said about us out there. That person under the guidance of a committee or involved in the committee that might be directly or indirectly with the governing body authority, but assess the risk of that communication. Is it defamatory? Is it just bad reflection on the school? Once they've determined the risk, they can then work out what is the severity of this incident. Is it likely that this is going to carry on boiling out, or in our opinion, is it going to not? From that, you can then look at a plan of action, and you can then either engage with the parent, or you can ignore the post and just keep an eye on what's happening on that social media platform, or you can get firmer with the parents and sit down with them and say, here's a letter warning you that you've overstepped the line and there are going to be consequences from that. Overall, you need to be aware of what's going on. It's continual awareness to be correct, continual awareness amongst the educators and the learners and the parents. Social media is not going away. I've lost the picture because it was quite a boring picture, but you can't put your head in the sand and think that social media is going to go past our schools. We see enough examples, and I think almost at every principal's meeting, after there's been a social media scare, everybody looks at that principal that's had a problem and say, sure, it was your turn this time, maybe it's ours next time. So unfortunately, it is something that's out there, and we need to create continual awareness amongst our educators, amongst the learners, which are probably the easier ones to communicate with because they're in our school and that's why we're there, but particularly amongst the parents. Parents have got no idea what happens on social media. At times they haven't got the foggiest of what's going on their children's cell phones. So we need to make sure that they are actively engaged and actually aware of what's going on. Really what it does boil down to is you need to be careful what you post, and that's the big message that we send out to everybody. To repeat what I've said, you can't determine where your post is going to be associated with. Someone will associate it with where they want to, and you've just got to be very careful where you post. And then the other thing that I haven't put out there is that digital is forever. Okay, it is out there. It's going to come back sometime. You need to be very aware from a school that what is posted out there is going to remain there. And with that, you need to look at it and assess it on lines of that this is going to be something that you're going to have to consider regularly, and you're going to have to monitor it on an ongoing basis. So those, and I don't want to point out any particular headmasters or principals or HRDs or anybody who may be in the audience, but those people who think social media is for someone else, unfortunately, it is part of your school. It's something that you're going to have to deal with. We're constantly working on getting more information to schools to help them. But unless we do something with social media, there is the distinct danger that it can damage your school, that you aren't on top of it as much as possible. Okay, so that's kind of what I've got to say today. It's now 3:45. It gives us a bit of time for some questions. At this stage, I'm hoping that Shane is hovering around somewhere in the vicinity. And then he would come back on and guide if there's been any questions coming through. Hiding lots of posts, people are going to start saying, well, why are we hiding posts? Okay, so that's the one way. If it's media that you have got charge of or control of, you can then remove them and take them off. But remember, some of the media has already gone out there. Someone puts a picture on I hate to use the example because it's so used, but I think we all understand. Someone puts a picture on the hockey moms group and it goes out there. It's out on everybody's phones. You can't bring that back. That's push communication. That's already gone out there. But on your other social platforms like Facebook and Instagram, if it's your account, you can actually remove it. If it's not your account, you can approach that organization and get them to delete those accounts, okay? If it is openly defamatory, if it's racist, if it's discriminatory, you can contact those organizations and get them to remove. There are contact lines. They're looking to be more responsible as well, because I think they've realized what's being created here. If they don't want to remove it, okay, if the individual doesn't want to remove it when you speak to him, then you can go through the process of asking him to remove an account that he's the administrator from, remove a post. So, for example, if I put on my Facebook page, ABC school is like a fraud, they don't know what they're doing. Okay, sorry, I'm using really language that maybe doesn't work, but we understand. The school can contact me and say, Paul, please could you remove that post because we don't appreciate it. I'm the administrator of that, I can then remove it. So that's the third way that you can remove it. But if it's openly defamatory, racist, incites violence, you can contact that organization and they will remove it. Some of them respond quicker than others, and they might be wherever they are based in the world, but they will respond to the communication to get it removed. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an answer on that one. Okay, let's just see.
Paul, just pause the recording. We've got a poll ready. How do you spell repercussion? Is it R-E-P-U-R?
Yeah.
R-E-P-U-R. C-U-S-S-I-O-N. Is that right? Is it R-E-P-E-R, repercussion, or reper?
Yeah, R-E-P-U-R-C-U-S-S-I-O-N-S.
I-O-S-N, repercussions. Okay. All right. So let's just
sure.
We've got this poll ready here, and I'm actually going to just launch it, and then there's one or two other questions which we'll get ready as well. So what we're asking here, and Paul, I hope this is kind of what you were thinking. But yeah, we can do another one if you want.
No, that's great, Shane. Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay, so folks, just give us a score there. You've got 5 options. So we want to just get your feedback regarding social incidents in your school. Where are you at? So for your school, would you say it's under control, no incidents? I mean, is there anybody that's likely to be able to select that one? Okay, I don't know. The second one, under control, maybe a few incidents. The third one is moderate to difficult incidents. And you can see it's just getting a bit worse, with the last one there being damaging with legal repercussions. And just excuse the spelling if we didn't get that quite right, but it's a serious multitasking.
Oh, no. No, that's fine. I think that's good.
Okay, great. All right, so the votes are coming in, Paul. I'm sure you can see them as well. We've already got 75% of the field have voted. And I'm just quickly, while we're getting those last, thanks, Magda. What about, okay, I don't think there's any questions that I've missed. So folks, just
I've got them as well. That's great.
Okay, it's all good. Okay, so guys, if there are maybe another one or two, please feel free to send them through. And we've got 75% of the field have voted, and I'm going to close the poll. We've got our 80%. We normally look for 80%, and I'm going to share the results with you guys. So, and then Paul, I'm going to invite you to maybe just chat about that as well. And the recording is still running, so this will be quite relevant for anybody who's only able to view the recording. Okay, so 70%, that's the majority by far, have opted for that second option. They're basically saying it's under control with a few incidents. And then the next one, 20% reported incidents that are damaging to the school's reputation. So there we go. What are your comments on that, Paul?
Yeah. I think it does show that we've kind of learned very quickly what to do with social media. I think if we ran this poll a year and a half ago, we would have had a lot higher repercussions, if you want to call it that, a lot higher incidence of repercussion than what we've got at the moment. So I think that to me is great, that we seem to get them under control. We seem to be learning. If I can add to that poll from my side, is I'm getting less and less calls about social media interaction, how we're going to handle it, than I was getting even a year ago, which is encouraging. So at least we are on the right track, that we're taking this seriously, and we're actually doing something about it, and we're actually managing it from that side. Obviously, delighted to hear that we don't have too many on the extreme end of the scale. That's creating real major issues, and those do flare up every now and again, and those obviously do take our attention in a bigger way. But it's good to hear that we don't have a lot at that end of the scale as well. And yeah, I think, as you said as well, very few schools have no incidents, and they are going to have certain incidents, and it's just a matter of giving them due recognition at the level which they are. So don't overreact to them, but don't just ignore them. I think that's really what I look at from that side there. So yeah.